We're joined this morning by another Biden challenger, Marianne Williamson, who's been advocating for a progressive overhaul in Washington. Marianne, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So we know what 4 years of a Marianne Williamson administration would look like. Basically, as I understand it, 4 years of finishing the promise of the New Deal from FDR.
Ways, yes.
I'm curious what you would think 4 more years of President Trump would do to this country.
I think President Trump does represent a threat to our democracy. He's talking about how we need to give him immunity. That's a request for dictatorship. The core to the American ideal is that no man is above the law, and that means no president either. So if a president is saying, give me immunity, he was saying in his speech last night, give me immunity so I can do what I need to do, otherwise you have an impotent president. That's he's saying, if the president is bound by the strictures of law, that's a bad thing. So no, he's not pretending to be one thing and then planning to do another. He's telling us what he wants, and he wants dictatorial power in this country. None of us should take that lightly.
If the Supreme Court restricts access to mifepristone later this year, that's the drug that is widely available for abortions early in pregnancy, what would be your plan as president for a workaround to bring back what is the status quo now, which is that women can easily obtain this drug?
I believe that the government should have absolutely nothing to do with a woman's choices regarding her body, period. And I would use all powers of the executive branch to codify and to protect a woman from that kind of overreach on the part of the United States government. This is a nation of liberty, and people in government have no right to overreach that way.
If you don't have the votes on Capitol Hill, though, obviously making changes in law would be important to Democrats. But if you can't do that, is there an executive order that brings mifepristone back in the face of a Supreme Court ruling, though?
Well, that would be for the lawyers to tell the president, and if the lawyers told me yes, then you better believe I would do it.
In your debate against Dean Phillips up here in Manchester, you went out of your way to say, quote, "I don't want to bring a bunch of Republicans and fiscal responsibility people into my cabinet." What's so bad about fiscal responsibility?
Oh, no. That's out of context. I said I don't believe that this government should be run like a fiscally responsible business. I said it should be run like a fiscally responsible family. You put your children first, not your corporate profits.
But you did say this. You say, "I don't want fiscal responsibility people in my cabinet."
Well, if I said that, that's still, again, a little bit out of context. Fiscal responsibility is important for all of us, but putting our children first, putting our families first is important to me, and that would be very clear and obvious in my presidency.
It seems you want to prioritize environmental protection over energy extraction here in the United States. So how do you bring down energy costs as president then?
We have to think not just about ourselves short term. We have to think about the future of this planet. We have to think about our children and our grandchildren. If the ramping up of fossil fuel extraction continues the way it is, we could have within 2 decades or much sooner whole swaths of continents which become uninhabitable because of the heat. We could have implosions of food systems, implosions of economies. It could be up to hundreds of millions of climate refugees. Do you think we have a refugee problem now? So we have to, as a country, think in terms not just of my short-term satisfaction, but what we need to do. Americans are hardwired to do great things. We've done great things before. And a mass mobilization to transition justly from a dirty economy to a clean economy will be the next great thing that the Americans do for ourselves and for our children.
That's going to take time, though. And every president wants foreign policy power. There's no one thing that would give you more power as a president than having energy independence here at home, right?
Well, when you talk about energy independence, but you're talking about energy independence that is predicated on destroying the planet, then that I don't see any ultimate good to that. That's just propaganda on the part of oil companies as far as I'm concerned. And as far as doing things quickly, when Franklin Roosevelt knew that we had to get into the war, Hitler had been building up his military for 5 years, and every time he invaded a country, he absorbed their industrial capacity. We had nothing. We ramped up quickly because that generation knew this needs to be done and we can do it. Americans have forgotten we do great things, and this will be one of the great next things that we do. We can invest massively in a green energy grid, and let's not forget how many millions of jobs that will create.
Let's say a ceasefire comes in Gaza, but then Hamas just begins planning the next 10/7 style terror attack. What is the consequence of a ceasefire if it does allow them to just begin again planning to eradicate Jewish people from their home state?
Hamas must go. There's no question about that. The issue is the current situation of the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. There's a legitimate argument that with every Hamas you kill, you create 10 more. But we need both. We need a ceasefire and we need a complete eradication of Hamas. The issue is whether that can be done militarily alone. There never was a military solution in that area, and there's not a military solution now. We need an international consortium here. The United States needs to be working in tandem with Arab powers, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Jordan, Egypt. They all want a two-state solution. Remember, those are nations who signed the Abraham Accords. They don't want a larger regional war, and they also realize what a danger is that Hamas poses as well. The issue is not whether or not Hamas has to go. The issue is how they go, and I do not agree that this war is the way to make it happen.
You know, so much of your life's work has been centered around just the idea of healing and improving human relations, and it's a sad fact that it seems like anti-Semitism has just become woven into human existence, unfortunately. So, as president, what can a president do to at least push that anti-Semitism back to the margins, get it in some kind of box on the fringe once again?
Anti-Semitism, like racism, like homophobia, and other malevolences of the human heart, have been woven into human civilization for thousands of years. That's understood. The issue is that you hope to create a society in which they become asymptomatic. We were growing up in a society, I was, in which no one would have thought those things didn't exist in this country. But there were guardrails, and among other things, you couldn't even imagine a major political party giving a megaphone to such forces as those. What we have now is those levees having fallen because of social media. Anybody can have a platform. I read somewhere once, I remember it was the comedian Sacha Baron Cohen. He said if Hitler were alive today, he'd be taking out 30-second ads on Facebook, and it just put a chill up my spine. We all know that these things have to begin with a place inside us that takes a stand and says no. The government, the president, among other things, has a bully pulpit, and you would certainly find in me strong, vocal support for all the peoples of this country, all the peoples of this country, and all good people of this world. Jewish American, Black American, transgender American. All men are created equal. All men with inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, Abraham Lincoln saw the Declaration of Independence as our North Star, as our vision statement. That's how I see it. And no group of Americans would find that this president did not have their back.
You know, you mentioned climate refugees, and right now in Washington, as they work to get a deal on Ukraine funding, one of the ideas is to accept some major changes to the law around asylum. If you were president, would you be willing to change asylum rules that would keep many more people out of this country?
No, I think asylum is sacred to this country. What we need is many more judges and adjudicators and interviewers at the border to establish, is there credible fear here? If there is credible fear here, according to the asylum laws that we have, then you move that person onto the next stage of their journey. If they do not fit the category of credible fear, then they must go back to their home country.
If you can't pass anything on gun control, again, that intractable Congress that we've got there on Capitol Hill, what's the best way to work around that obstacle? Can you reduce the number of mass shootings in this country without passing something related to the Second Amendment?
No, when we had an assault weapon ban during that 10 years, we had fewer of them. But we're also going to have to get beyond, is it culture or is it guns? It is both. We're going to be a violent society, no matter how many guns we have, until we decide to be a nonviolent society. And that begins in our own hearts. You know, I want a Department of Peace. I want to help make peace sexy. I want to help make the search for peace and the journey to peace inside us, as well as in our communities and on our streets, part of what this generation sees as our moral as well as political calling in order to repair this country. We've
got about a minute left. Quick question for you here. I also asked it to Dean Phillips. Do you think New Hampshire can remain relevant in the face of the DNC trying to put it down
the DNC could take delegates away from us. It cannot take away the significance of the New Hampshire primary from the New Hampshire voter. And I hope every New Hampshire voter is very aware of that. Their vote will matter because the people all over America will be listening. And what New Hampshire voters decide to do on Tuesday will have tremendous import. That is not a decision for the DNC to make.
All right, Marianne Williamson, we'll see you out there on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
In these final hours.